Hello, everyone. Welcome to the War Room Podcast, the War and Conflict Team podcast. Every episode, we discuss a different topic from war and conflict. I am one of your hosts, Kyle. Joined with me, as always, my co-host, James, also known as my dad.
Hello,
Today,
everyone.
we are going to be talking about the Christmas truce, as well as the Tet offensive. The two looks into different points in warfare that involve holidays specifically. We did intend to record this during the holidays, but we both got sick. Not with COVID, luckily, but just with period. So we kind of got taken out of commission and weren't able to record it quite on the same pace that we wanted to. But we're here now to provide it. It'll be an interesting lesson as we go through. But before we do any of that, I do want to ask, how are you doing? What's going on? What's new?
I'm doing great. I did want to make sure we start out with a big congratulations. Kyle got engaged. That's
Yes.
a pretty big deal for his first engagement.
Yeah, first one. Hopefully the last one as well. But
So congratulations.
thank you very much. Very excited.
We're all excited for you.
Yeah, Ginger in the chat is my now fiance. So very excited about that. Very very happy. We have gotten a lot of questions about what we're when we're like what our plan is, like when we're gonna get married, where we're gonna get married. To which I have told all those people, give me a week.
Give it a day or two, right?
Give it a day, exactly. I appreciate the thought for sure, but
the enthusiasm.
also I'd like to just enjoy it, for at least a little bit. Would be nice. So we're just gonna enjoy it for a week. I'm not even gonna think about the where and the why and any of that.
Yeah, I'm sure the moms and like your sister, they've already planned it out for you. You just
I mean, I hope I actually don't even know about that. We'll see. But either way, it's gonna be fun. Very excited about it. But yeah, we were both sick. So it's good to be back full on. It's gonna be exciting. We did obviously also have quite a bit of domestic news that has occurred with all the stuff that happened in DC, as well as the inauguration. Quite a bit of news, in the U.S. front as well, that we can maybe get into later after the episode's done if we want to have a little side conversation. But a lot of stuff's been happening.
There's some similarities to that time period and to this time period, believe it or not. So there is a lot of similarities.
I believe actually. That. Yeah. But with that said, today's episode, we're going to be talking about holidays during warfare. Specifically, we're going to kind of be looking at two case studies. I already talked about it, but we're going to be looking at the Christmas truce that occurred in World War I. So that's going to be a big focus for us. And then we're going to talk about the Tet offensive, or the Tet truce. Both this occurred during Vietnam. Now, I should say, before we even, and we'll mention this again as we go on, but we do want to mention very quickly that we are going to be talking about the Tet offensive in Vietnam, which is a conflict that people currently alive today did experience.
Yes.
And were continued to experience throughout the entirety of it. It was a 20-year conflict, so a very long period of time with quite a lot of especially U.S. soldiers involved. So we do want to say if that is something that we kind of want to put out a general trigger warning, just be aware we are going to be talking about it. We always do our best to be as respectful as possible to everyone involved, and we're not going to. Yeah, we're gonna be respectful, but just do be aware that it is going to be talked about. So if that is something you don't feel comfortable hearing, or if it's something you don't want to even talk about, no issues, no worries. We'll give you a warning.
We'll let you know before we even get into it. So exactly. That if you want to bow out and not listen to the rest of the podcast, you're welcome to. We absolutely understand the importance of respect for those that actually were impacted in their life by this. So if you feel that you need to step away from the computer or the phone or tablet or whatever you happen to be watching on, feel free to do so. Uh, our intent is just to look at it, not necessarily uh, cause anybody any undue hardship.
Correct. Yeah, and we are going to be talking about some very specific events as well. So again, we'll reference that as we go. But we're actually not going to start with that just yet. We are going to start with the Christmas truce. It happened in World War One, which luckily I think there should be far less people watching this podcast that were involved. I don't actually know if there's any surviving. I think there is still a couple surviving World War One veterans, I believe.
There's only a couple. It's
Yeah,
less than 5.
yeah, I doubt that they're in the. I doubt that they're in the thing. But we still do want to pay respect. We always try to do that with all conflicts. But it is a little bit different when the odds of someone who experienced it, being in the chat is lower. Anywho, we're gonna start with that. The reason we want to start with that is it's actually I think it's a really interesting story about the way the mechanisms by which war and conflicts occur and how wars actually work and the nitty gritty of it, as well as I think it is a pretty interesting look at humanity and human nature. It raises a lot of interesting questions. I think it's a fascinating topic. I'm going to be honest. I feel like World War II gets a lot of time paid to it, rightfully so, to an extent, in history classes and the History Channel and stuff like that. But I think World War One is a really fascinating conflict that's kind of pretty overstepped in a lot of areas, a lot of knowledges.
It's easy to kind of talk about World War II because there were monsters. And so it's easy to pin something to a figure, Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
However, with World War One, there aren't a lot of those figures. It was just different.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it. Is also with World War II, we really were doing a lot of battlefield coverage.
Yeah.
A lot of filming. And so because of the sheer volume of footage of it, it is all automatically going to drown out World War One.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
No, exactly. Also, I think there is a little bit of a U.S. centricism or centritism. I don't know the right word, but World War One, we really didn't have that big of a part in it until towards the end, and even then, it wasn't. When you compare the efforts by country, the U.S. was pretty small,
minimal,
or is it actual impact on the conflict compared to World War II, which was very U.S. centric war towards the latter half of the war, I should say, especially in the Pacific, as well as on certain fronts. We had
definitely
a very large hand in those. So those are it's a little bit different as well for history, but I still think I think World War One is a really important lesson, and it has a lot of lessons period to take away that are fascinating.
Very much so.
So with that, we're actually going to talk about a very specific event in war. Now, some people might have heard of this. Some people haven't. I've seems like it's about 50-50 of the people I've asked, because it is a pretty. It's not necessarily important in the sense that like it didn't change the conflict really, but it is a really important glance into World War One. What happened on December 25th, I believe 1914, which was the date of the Christmas truce. To give a little bit of background on what happened, essentially during December 25th, there was almost kind of a standstill, a truce that happened between Germans and English soldiers at the time on the Western Front. There was caroling. There was hundreds of men in no man's land just exchanging gifts and stories, talking to each other. There was football that was being played, soccer here in the U.S. It was this is 5 months into the war, by the way. So the war had been going on for long enough for a fair amount of people to die. This was not like the day that it started. These were men that have been fighting each other for a decent amount of time, and by this point, they were actually led to believe the war would have ended. They were told that they expected to wrap it up by Christmas.
Yeah, they thought they were within weeks of being done, honestly.
Um,
And it actually started Christmas Eve,
yeah.
um, and carried over through into the Christmas holiday.
Mhm.
And you're right. You were talking about the British troops, but the other fronts, the Russian front and the French front, that did not happen there.
Yeah.
Um, one of the reasons is that the Russian uh, calendar was a Julian calendar. They don't
Mhm.
even celebrate Christmas. They didn't celebrate Christmas at the same time,
Yeah.
first of all. And on the French side, um, they didn't do it mainly because what, three-quarters of France was occupied at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. France was in a very different position.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it was a little bit different. One of the other things that I read about is that uh, not very many of the English um, soldiers spoke German,
Mhm.
but quite a few of the German soldiers had actually worked in England
Yeah.
and did know English. So it and the reason I'm bringing that up is because normally this can't happen
Mhm.
if there's a huge language barrier.
Yeah.
If you can't communicate your intentions,
Mhm.
soldiers are not going to come out of a foxhole.
Yeah.
They're not going to come out of a trench if they don't know specifically what you're really doing.
Yeah.
They're not gonna risk their lives
Mhm.
on a potential on a whim.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
there had to be clear communication as to what the intent was. Um,
Yeah.
Specifically, there was, it was stated, hey, if you don't shoot at me, I won't shoot at you.
Yeah.
At one point, a commander literally announced, hey, I won't shoot at you for 3 days. We are not going to engage you. Now,
Mhm.
keep in mind that this front is a very large front.
Yeah.
So um, this took place spontaneously.
Mhm.
This was not an armistice that was signed by two countries or
Yeah.
the leaders of two countries. This happened quite literally on the battlefield in the mud, and it happened spontaneously, kind of throughout the line, not the entire line,
Yeah.
because there was still battles, people skirmishing,
Mhm.
e- even though others were not.
Yeah.
Some people were singing while literally there was gunfire, you know, 2,000 meters away. They
Yeah.
could hear the guns shooting, so they
No,
knew the
exactly.
war wasn't over. Obviously,
Yeah, yeah. This was it was almost like a microcosm. It was something that happened just because all the things were kind of set up for it to happen. But before we get too much into the actual event itself, I actually want to give a little bit of context as to what kind of created the situation for this to happen, as well as just what kind of created the situation for World War One. Just for anyone that's not super. I feel like a lot of people know about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, um, how that led to World War One, quote unquote. In actuality, it was really just the last spark that was needed to light what was already going to be a global conflict. The militarization of the German Empire, combined with the facts, the treaties and partnerships signed by multiple countries, essentially linking them to those conflicts, were just a powder keg that was always going to end up in a conflict, seemingly. So really, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand is just kind of the excuse that's used to start the war. But the war was always going to happen. Germany was always going to step into Belgium and France because that's what they wanted to do. They clearly had aims to do that pretty far before that. So this was all kind of set up and laid out prior. Um,
well, and any conflict is costly.
yeah.
So people don't engage in wars because they were offended or
Hmm.
because they were slighted. There has to the cost of waging war is so high
Hmm.
that there has to be lots of reasons to do it.
Yeah.
Um, but when it boils down to it, you always have to decide what is the final straw or what is the catalyst
The thing
that
I can
all
use.
those
Yeah.
other considerations that were taking place, what was the catalyst? And for whatever reason, historians decided that Archduke Ferdinand was the catalyst. Honestly, he's just a minor figure, to be quite honest, of not a lot of importance. But very quickly after that took place, hostilities started. So
Yes. Yeah. Specifically, again, we're talking about the British German forces in this specific regard. So I'm not going to talk too much about the French and the Russians, just because it's not relevant to this conversation.
They didn't participate.
Yeah, on the Western Front. But for the Germans, the assassination was the reason to be able to start stepping into countries. They wanted to get a hold in that area, so they actually asked Belgium if they could essentially cross through. They were told no, obviously, and they invaded Belgium. I believe this was the same time they were invading France. The invasion of Belgium, was actually what let the British get into the war. That was their excuse.
Correct.
Again, they were going to do it anyways. They just needed a reason, but that was the reason that they chose, and that was good enough. Actually, there's a really interesting thing with that specifically, in that a big reason a lot of British soldiers, and they were asked. There's evidence of this in papers as well as just historical record. Was the atrocities committed in Belgium by the savage German forces. It turns out there were atrocities that occurred in Belgium by the German forces, but a lot of the ones that were written about by the British actually didn't happen ever. They were manufactured.
Propaganda.
Exactly. British media at the time was essentially censored and largely a little controlled by the government. The government didn't go up and say, "Hey, here's the thing you need to print," but journalists were not allowed in conflict zones, nor were they privy to military intelligence. So the only thing that they had to go on was briefings that were given by the government and by the military. So effectively, they were able to control and say whatever they wanted to the publications. And they didn't really have any other information to go on other than that. So that was what was printed. Now there were some people that there were obviously examples of this not happening, but this is a consistent thing we're going to see throughout World War I, that especially leads into the Christmas truce, which is that the government is exclusively trying to control the narrative presented to the public. Because at the end of the day, especially in a democratic nation, you have to justify a conflict to the public, because that you were talking about, there's a heavy cost to conflict. In a democratic nation, the cost of conflict, if you lose, is your job. You are no longer in power. Now, in other nations, if you're a dictator and you lose a conflict, you probably die. If you're a rebel leader and you lose a conflict, you probably die. So there's obviously different levels for different people and things like that. But democratic nations have a very interesting risk-reward system when it comes to conflict. So keeping public opinion high for a conflict is super important, because as soon as that's gone, as soon as people are no longer voting you in because they don't believe in the decision you've made, the war is irrelevant because you've lost power. That, by the same note, if you actually lose a conflict, straight up, you've lost. The odds of you getting elected are very low as well. So there's very high incentive once a conflict is engaged in for democratic nations to continue engaging in that conflict, as well as maintaining as high a public opinion as they can for that conflict, which is something we're going to see pretty frequently.
Well, and keep in mind that during World War I, that was fairly simple.
Yeah.
There wasn't a TV. All of your news came from a paper
Or radio.
or a wire. Even radio at that point,
I guess radio would be pretty in its infancy.
It existed, but the masses didn't have it.
Yeah, that's true. Actually,
honestly, well-populated places might have it, but rural places they wouldn't have a radio. So they were getting all their stuff via a paper of some sort, or a pamphlet. And so it's very easy to control the narrative to some extent
Yeah.
in that time period for every one of these nations, honestly. But yes, the controlling the narrative of combat or warfare, honestly, even natural disasters, is paramount of importance for governments, period. And then if you break it down even simpler, control of information, even in a household, is very important. There are things that you share with your spouse that you don't share with your children because they're not ready for that. They're not mature enough for it. And so you do censor information even in a household.
Yeah.
Because of, you don't want panic. You don't want people to be afraid of things they don't need to be afraid of necessarily. So it is a microcosm of our society that so much information is now available. And it's even more important to control the narrative today just because there's so much narrative out there and so much truth and so much, filtered truth or lies.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's honestly amazing how much is out there. It's crazy.
No, I agree. Sorry, I'm fixing the title. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, actually.
So back to
Yeah.
our Christmas deal. I want to just read a personal account real quick.
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. So Lieutenant Johannes Newman, a Saxon who served in the 133rd, recalled on Christmas morning. Okay, so now these are his words. And this is not like that day. This is obviously from him later on.
Yeah.
The mist was slow to clear, and suddenly my orderly threw himself into my dugout to say that both the German and Scottish soldiers had come out of their trenches and were fraternizing along the front. I grabbed my binoculars and looked cautiously over the parapet, saw the incredible sight of our soldiers exchanging cigarettes, schnapps, and chocolate with the enemy. Later, a Scottish soldier appeared with a football, which seemed to come from nowhere, and a few minutes later, a real football match got underway. The Scots marked their goal mouth with their strange caps, strange caps, and we did the same with ours. It was far from easy to play in the frozen ground, but we continued, keeping rigorously to the rules, despite the fact that only lasted an hour and that we had no referee. A great many of the passes went wide, but all the amateur footballers, although they must have been very tired, played with huge enthusiasm. That may not seem very profound to a lot of people, but having been in a combat zone, having to have actually faced a foe, this is a very profound thing. To be able to set aside your anger, your sadness, your pain, your suffering, and just play a game with somebody that quite literally hours beforehand you would have shot right in the face. Okay. Is a very profound thing, and it does say something about humans.
Yeah.
And the fact that we are, above all, very adaptable. We can settle a grievance in a heartbeat if we choose to.
Yeah.
And we can extend that grievance to a murderous rage if we choose to.
Yeah.
And he was shocked initially that this was taking place. And then within a very short period of time, he's probably playing soccer.
Yeah.
Now, what's not stated there is what happens when the truce ends.
Yeah.
Um, so let's just talk about during the truce, and then we'll talk about what
Yeah.
happens when the truce
Yeah.
ends.
So yeah, we already kind of talked about it, but this didn't necessarily happen on all fronts. This didn't happen um, all across even just this front. There was isolated incidents happening. There was this is actually kind of an example of a couple things, which is there was actually a decent amount of fraternization that happened on specifically the Western Front prior to this as well. That continued during this truce. Of just you have to remember there was certain trenches that were within 50 yards of each other. There was some that were great distances away, and there were others that were extremely close to the point where, I mean, you could hear people singing and talking and writing notes, and you could very easily communicate with someone if you really wanted to, and that did happen quite frequently. It seems as though, by a lot of accounts, there really was just visual signs that celebrations were going on, and people could hear singing on both sides, and then people would join in with the singing, and then eventually, I think there was just this realization, especially World War One is such a specific type of horrific, with the style of conflict that was fought, the location it was fought in. It was a like all war is brutal, but that was brutal.
The conditions were absolutely terrible
Yeah,
for those individuals. The equipment at that time was absolutely terrible.
yeah,
So the living conditions, just the day-to-day living conditions, were astronomically horrible.
mm,
Um, and I don't want people to misunderstand. There wasn't like um, this was a very tentative and scary thing for these folks.
yeah,
Uh, to poke your head up in a trench was you were taking your life, into your
rolling the
hands, like
dice.
literally. That's what they were looking for, was a head to pop up. So just popping your head up was a risk.
Yeah,
And so I don't want people to think that everybody just went, oh, you know what? We're just gonna sing a song and everybody's
hmm,
gonna come out. No, most accounts talk about how there was singing, right? They were
hmm,
celebrating in their own
yeah,
trench. And then the other side, like you had said, most of them were within hearing distance of any singing. Um, and whenever there was a lull in the singing over there, these guys got the idea to go ahead and they were celebrating in their trench as well,
yes,
in their own way. And so then they would sing, would clap.
yeah,
Now, singing, clap, that's the beginning, believe it or not, of the communication. Now,
yeah,
granted, songs were in different languages,
yeah,
but the cadence and the tone, you can usually tell what's being sung.
hmm,
Um, but honestly, that's probably really the start of it.
yeah,
Is not them celebrating together, but them
exactly.
celebrating individually and them having that bond of,
Mm,
you know what? Hey, uh, they're celebrating, we're celebrating. And then somebody probably throws a rock with a piece of paper on
yeah. Actually,
it.
I read an account of that there was
Yeah.
notes that were thrown across. Yeah,
Yes, yeah, because look, I'm not sticking my head out.
yeah,
This is Christmas Eve.
yeah.
I want
I
to
don't want to die
survive
on
till
Christmas Eve.
Christmas. So, I don't want people to get the wrong idea.
I
Now,
agree.
these trenches were absolutely horrifying living conditions.
Mm,
Okay. These folks were covered in mud. They had mud in every place imaginable.
yeah,
There was no place to get away from it.
yeah. And
And
at
it
this
didn't matter
time,
whether you were.
it had freshly snowed because remember it's December, so
Mhm. Yep.
there's frost covered as well as there's a fresh layer of snow that.
Yeah. You cannot get away from the wetness
Mm-hmm.
until it turns to ice.
Yeah.
So, in the trenches where you dig down in the dirt, it doesn't freeze down there. It stays wet. It
Yeah.
stays sloggy. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's miserable. And it didn't matter, like I say, if you were a private or a colonel.
Yeah.
The living conditions were just
Yeah,
horrible.
yeah, but
Uh,
I think it sets an interesting undertone that was important for this to happen as well, which is that this was a miserable experience for everyone involved.
mhm.
So miserable, in fact, that a lot of people really there was quite a few people who joined willingly into the war based on these uh, propaganda that was spread by either of their nations, and were told that this was a just thing, this was the right thing, this is what they should be doing. And within 5 months, after knowing fully well that this war is not going to end today, that we're just exhausted. With
Mhm.
their exhausted with their own leadership, exhausted with their military leadership. They didn't really have a reason to fight other than they were being told to fight. And at this moment, uh, they weren't really being told to fight. They were being allowed to have a moment to just relax and celebrate the holidays. And I think that
Well,
that idea of just them having a moment, not being told or forced to run at each other through a whistle, um, was a big step in the way of making this thing happen.
well,
Um,
there are accounts of uh, officers coming through and telling their people, "Hey, if you see a German, you shoot them on sight," and and individuals ignoring them.
yeah,
And then there are accounts where officers literally were, kicking and hitting their troops to spur them on to continue to fight. Um, the senior leadership did not like this. Uh, Even the rumors of a truce, they did
yeah,
not like it because, um, from a military standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, it's not good for you.
mm,
It's you never want to have uh, the potential for people to decide on their own to no longer continue to fight.
yeah,
It's bad for business,
yeah,
as a senior leader.
mm,
It just is. You want them to fight when you tell them to fight, and you want them to retreat when you tell them to retreat. You
yeah,
don't want them to decide those things on their own,
yeah,
for their own reasons. So the senior leadership really was not pleased with this taking place at all.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, there's a reason that this is called the 1914 Christmas truce, because this did not happen again. Leadership ensured that this would not happen again, to the point where there was, I believe, the next year, there was actually a um, field surgeon who suggested was trying to work a truce during Christmas time to be able to retrieve bodies. That man was court-martialed for that, for trying to communicate with German forces and try to set up a truce. That wasn't even to set up song and dance. It was literally just, can we go collect the bodies for Christmas? We'll let you collect your bodies. We'll collect our bodies. That was even stamped out. And that was a practice that took place prior to this Christmas truce. There was plenty of there's quite a few instances of uh, like temporary truces that were put into effect to get soldiers from the battlefield, to get food rations to either side. Essentially, both sides, the food rations would come at the same time, and neither sides would attack. That way, they ensure they could at least be fed. Um, there was truces for collecting bodies. There was truces for cleaning up areas, things like that. There was quite a few that were set out. But after this point, there was a huge crackdown on these ideas because, again, you're right. It's antithetical to what the leadership wants. And at the end of the day, World War I is the story of what happens when you have ineptitude mixed with an inability to back down. In my opinion, I think it is a prime example of multiple sides that don't know how to fight the war they're fighting, but can't step down because that would mean relinquishing power, and it would also mean telling the public that the conflict that they got engaged in, uh, they didn't actually know how to deal with. They didn't know how to fight. Those are things that any leader would lose their title, would lose their power for. And that is too large of a cost for them to pay, until it became a cost that they couldn't ignore, which is essentially what happened. But yeah, there's an interesting idea of the importance on cracking down, as this is a concept everywhere, not even just for this Christmas event. At that point, it became very costly to try to engage in this behavior at any point during the con.
Now, I will say that it's difficult to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
And so now, if you look at military history as a whole, they flat tell you that the Christmas truce of 1914 was a one-time event.
Mm-hmm.
However, that's not actually true. So in 1915, there were there were units that actually observed a Christmas truce. So I found a diary written by Private Robert Keating. And so he is let's see here. Trying to see where he was. So he is with the 15th Battery Royal Welsh Fusiliers. All right. And he wrote a diary. Now, he was 16 years old. And he wrote a diary, and he actually talks about Christmas in 1915. And it says that the German counterparts said that they were absolutely fed up and believed that the war would end in a few months in our favor, in their favor, in the British's favor. So even a year later, they soldiers being soldiers are still going to contemplate when these things are actually going to be done. So on Christmas morning, they had breakfast, and then they started shouting to the Germans, and the Germans were shouting back. And at some point, they literally started singing again. And at a certain point, they were even got up out of their trenches, and then they communicated. Now, they did not play soccer. The leadership still was trying to squash this thing.
Yeah.
But there's only so much control that you have.
Sure. Yeah.
So, like I said, militarily, they want you to believe that it never happened before and never happened again. But that's just not true.
That's fair.
The truth is that you can't control the entire universe.
Yeah.
But you can control the narrative.
Yeah, I should say it never happened on that scale again. That's
correct.
I guess
yes, definitely.
Because that involved roughly 1,000 people. It was a lot of people all during this. Yeah, there were sporadic ones of like.
But I did like the fact that this kid was conscientious enough and to write a diary, and then he was able to actually keep it.
Yeah.
And it's now in the Museum of the Welsh. I don't even know what that word means. Fusiliers.
Oh, okay.
And I might not even be pronouncing it right, but I like the fact that once him and his wife had passed, the neighbor inherited it, and she made sure that it got turned in. She didn't even know that he was even in World War I. But it is a microcosm, and it can only happen under very, very, very unique conditions.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah, and there's also like, this is a thing some people might have heard of, but this is not a thing that was really made available to the public until the first. So there was
years later.
Yeah, it was 40 years later where the general public really knew anything. I think in 1964 there was a BBC documentary that covered this. Because remember, again, at the time, the British, they didn't tell reporters what to write, but reporters weren't allowed on the battlefield until 1915, 1916. So they were only getting whatever was said by the brass and any letters that they could get from soldiers. But remember, when you write a letter on the war front in World War I, that letter is reviewed.
Correct.
Before it's sent out, to make sure that you're not leaking secrets and things like that. So a lot of the letters that actually talked about this event were censored by the military before they got
Yeah.
out.
It was an urban legend until it was actually released.
Yeah.
People knew about it, people heard about it, but only word of mouth and only from people that might have been there. And that is somewhat, some people just wouldn't believe it to begin with.
Yeah.
They would say, "Oh yeah, that's a fairy tale. That's a great Christmas story, but it's not really true." And you have to understand that a lot of people don't share information that of their experiences either. Very few people that experience things like that really talk about it with somebody that doesn't have any, like they may talk about it with each other occasionally, and only occasionally, but they don't generally just open up and talk to total strangers about it, or even loved ones.
Also, when you look at the devastation of World War One, it is hard to believe. We looked into this before we started the call. There was around, so it's hard to find exact estimates on casualty rates in World War One. I found a couple different ones, but I believe the Encyclopedia Britannica has the estimate of 40 million casualties. That's civilian and military throughout the entire war. For reference, that is 2% of the entire global population at the time just dead. If you were to take that number now, if you took 2% of the current population of the globe, that's 7.6 billion people, that would be 153 million people gone. That's the population of Russia. Just imagine if all of Russia was just gone from the population, like the effect that would have on everyone, the global economy, everything. Half of the U.S. is roughly 153. If you just imagine half the U.S. going away, how devastating that would be for the globe. And some of these countries, and that's obviously with the global population, but some of these countries experienced higher than that. Some of these countries experienced losses of 10% to 20% of their entire population from this conflict. So this was not a thing that people held in light regard. This was a very devastating and horrific experience. Not even including the fact that you have to remember this is also during the time of the influenza epidemic. This is also during the time of the Armenian genocide. There's a lot of other things going on in the world that are horrific and killing a lot of people. So this was a very dark time for human history and a lot of countries' history. And to think that this kind of event could happen at the same time as that devastation, I think is a pretty difficult concept to wrap your head around, especially when you're freshly experiencing it.
Now, I will say that it makes for a great story. Okay. People going out and playing football and all of that. But I will tell you that from a military standpoint, as a leader in the military, I always would be very cautious about allowing these things to take place. It is very, so you and I had a conversation not too long ago about how back then leaders kind of used information, the football coach, rah, 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 fight for this and fight for your gal and so on and so forth. We don't do that anymore. The reason we don't really do that anymore is because it only lasts for a short period of time. And you can only motivate people by these patriotic and, type of things for so long. And then they start to realize that war sucks. Morale drops and you struggle to get them re-engaged. We've changed our tactics in these years. And now we train soldiers in how to wage warfare. We have a standing military and we condition them for combat. And by conditioning, I mean, we absolutely condition you for combat. We train you. Okay. We use terms that are very general and vague. You know, when we talk about any conflict, it's the enemy.
Hmm.
We don't give them a specific name. We we don't, you know,
Real quick, can you
we
move
don't
your
do
mic a little bit closer? When you're
yeah,
backing up, it's kind of hard to hear. Thanks.
we don't we condition them to fight, not to fight a specific person. And
Hmm.
that's changed throughout the years. We used to train to fight the Soviets, we used to train to fight the Chinese, we used to train to fight different entities. Now we train to fight, period.
Yeah.
No identity whatsoever. And it makes it easier,
Yeah.
believe it or not, to get people to fight because they're conditioned just to fight. They don't need a reason to engage the Soviets. They don't need a reason to engage the Afghans, the Iraqis. They don't need that.
Yeah.
They're conditioned to fight because that's what we do. We just fight.
Hmm.
And you know who's on the other side matters a lot less today than
Yeah.
it did back then. It's a
Yeah. I
big difference.
yeah, 100%. I think there is definitely a and I think we'll probably wrap up here so we can just for the sake of time. But I think add to that note, there's also an interesting thing in that is a luxury of an established nation state to be able to do. Like we think about war and conflict in the way that we understand it, which from the U.S. perspective is the largest, strongest military in history. Um, but the majority of conflicts are fought at a an interstate level. Like a lot of, or at least I guess in modern times, I don't know about in history, but if you look at the conflicts that have taken place post World War II, almost all of them have been civil wars, rebel organizations, terrorist organizations. They're not nation states that are fighting. Um,
Yeah.
if I'm a rebel group, if I'm a terrorist organization, if I'm any kind of group that doesn't have the monopoly on power, is not the standing military at the time, I don't have the luxury of training people in that way. Usually, there's some caveats to that. Largely,
Yeah.
what I need to do is
But
I need
not
to get
usually.
people to believe that
Correct.
this is the right cause to the point that they're willing to die and kill for it. And that is a much more difficult proposition to get someone to go through. And it
Well, it's easy to
requires
get them started. It's hard to keep them going.
exactly, yeah. You need to maintain a pretty high level of confidence from them. And if that confidence is ever shattered, there's nothing to fall back on, really.
Nope.
So there's a lot of rebel groups that just dissolve because
Yeah.
the cost is not worth the conflict, or the reason they're engaging isn't enough for people to want to fight, whether that be through plunder or through patriotism. It's kind of irrelevant if people don't have that reward system. So it is very different for each conflict. But I think we wrapped up quite a bit there. I don't want to get too
Just
off
real
topic.
quick, I do want to mention that we are not the biggest. There are several nations out there with much larger armed forces as
Well,
far as
that's
numbers.
in the case of
However,
military power.
however, we're able to wage war on a scale that no one else can,
That's what I mean. Yeah,
just
sorry.
because of our technology.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't mean literal people. Yeah, our
Yeah.
advantage in technology, reach, first strike capability, funding, physical ships and planes and vehicles is pretty unprecedented. But that's a fair conversation. Any other thoughts about the Christmas truce before we move on?
Um, I like the story.
Mhm.
I like the fact that it happened.
Yeah.
Um, but it it it's not something that can happen
Hmm.
uh, normally.
Yeah.
It's a micro blip in history. It's very unique.
Yeah.
I love the fact that humans are that resilient.
Mhm.
One and two that they're that adaptable.
Yeah.
And I love it,
Hmm.
but at the same time, um, I wouldn't allow my folks to do it.
That's fair.
Now, you know, I just is what it is.
Yeah,
You know?
I think I want to make sure that anyone listening understands this idea that when we talk about these things and when we talk about like best way to wage war and things like that, we're really rarely ever coming at the standpoint of the morality of it, because war is inherently not moral. There's no way to wage war in a moral matter. Um,
No.
that's not how it works. So I think it's uh, while that doesn't necessarily mean, like, that doesn't remove accountability and things like that. I think it's important to note that, like, any war, regardless of how just you think you can make it, is inherently immoral. And we don't really think about it, or we're not really going to think about it in that way, because it's not helpful to do so, to be honest. Because these things happen, and they have to happen in a lot of cases. But yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Now, before we move to the next topic, do you need to take a break, or are you good to go?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. In that case, this is the part where we're going to go ahead and put our warning. Actually, I'm even going to add the warning to our title. Discussion.
All right. While you do that, I'm gonna make and fill up my water.
Cool. Okay, and I'm adding a warning to the title that we are going to be talking about Vietnam, about the Vietnam War, because again, I understand that this, for some people, might not be a topic they want to hear or talk about or feel comfortable talking about, especially because we are going to be talking about numbers. We're going to be talking about historical events from the perspective of how they happened in history, which is a very different effect when you're explaining that to someone that might have been present during that events or connected in some way to those events. Quite a few U.S. soldiers who died, quite a few South Vietnamese soldiers who died, quite a few North Vietnamese soldiers who died, and this is in recent memory. Again, we do want to put out that warning. I have updated the title as well. So just in case, please feel free to hop out, check out. You are good to go, and we're not going to take it personally. Go ahead and close that down. And then I think we're going to go ahead and talk about the Tet Offensive is what we're going to go into next. And then after that, we're actually going to talk a little bit about, well, we'll see how much time we have, but we think we're going to probably get some conversations with my dad about the holidays in modern battlefield and what his experience was with those deployments. Cool. You all ready to go, Dad?
I am. Yes.
Okay. I already gave her a warning. I also have updated our title. So it does say warning, discussion of the Vietnam War for anyone that's coming in. That way it shouldn't be a surprise. Again.
So, hey, real quick.
Yeah.
So anybody that watches this that is a Vietnam veteran, I'd like to first say, thank you for your service.
Yeah.
It was a unique time in history, and you guys had to deal with things that honestly just should not have happened to you guys. So thank you. And I appreciate it personally. And I know my family appreciates your guys' service.
Yeah, me as well.
Agreed. Kyle's grandfather, he's a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah.
In the Marine Corps. So we want to, we respect all of you, and we appreciate you, every one of you.
100%. Couldn't have said it better. With that, we are going to talk about the Tet Offensive. Now, before we get into that, I just want to quickly explain. Tet is the Vietnamese New Year. I hope I'm pronouncing Tet right. I'm just going by how it's spelled, T-E-T. But it is the most important holiday in Vietnam. It coincides to a lot of important New Year's celebrations in that entire region. But specifically for Vietnam, that is the most important day, or well, days out of the year. It's multiple. It's over the stretch of essentially the end of last month or last weeks of January.
Well, and it's a lunar New Year, not a calendar New Year. So it doesn't have an actual fixed date.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, like our calendar year has a fixed date.
Okay.
Even a leap year, it's a
Mhm.
fixed date. Uh, but for them, it's a lunar calendar
Yeah,
New Year, and so it does have some variation to it. But it is their most important holiday.
yeah. Extremely important. Families get together to celebrate. There's loads of traditions that take place over the entirety of the event. There's decorations, there's food, there's a whole bunch of things involved. Um, so it's a pretty important time. Now, transfer that to looking at Vietnam during the Vietnam War, where it's a split country. There's North Vietnam, South Vietnam. But there is also this interesting thing that seems to be happening relatively consistently, where during the Tet time period, there is kind of an informal truce that occurs between.
It's not informal. It was an absolute truce. Like it
Well,
was
there wasn't
announced.
written documentation that it was
No, it was
happening.
announced.
Oh, was it?
It was
Oh,
absolutely announced. Yes.
oh, my research said
The
not. But if
the
you have something,
no,
okay.
The North Vietnamese actually put out that there would be a truce. I think it was a 7-day truce.
Hmm.
And keep in mind that this was happening throughout the war.
Yeah,
Now, uh, I guess what we really need to discuss is why would you allow someone to have a truce?
yeah. Yeah. So this is a really interesting and different version of what we had talked about previously, and that this is organized by the military. This is
And the
this
government.
in the government. This comes from high up in leadership, and the reason being is there's actually reasons that can be pretty beneficial to you as a standing military to engage in a truce. There is the more uh, less literal. There's the more literal things of you can act now. You can repair things that you need repaired. You can transport things with a little bit less scrutiny from other forces. You can build back up your forces if need be. But there's also the literal fact that your soldiers need to rest. You cannot run people 24/7 all the time without any breaks. And being able to give them at least some semblance of time off, even though there was still conflicts and there was still tension and there were still things happening at the time. Again, this is a very different war. The North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese felt very differently about each other and about the conflict than the Germans and the English did in World War One. But there's advantage to being able to give your soldiers a psychological reprieve, even if it's a small one for a small section of time. Not even including the tactical advantage of being able to rebuild back up your force.
Well, there's something that has to take place constantly in a combat zone, um, or in any conflict. Um, Reconsolidation, reorganization, resupply. Those things continually have to take place. So what does that mean? Well, resupply is fairly easy. That's getting, you were using up and consuming items,
Yeah,
and you're getting them and resupplying.
yeah, beans and bullets.
Um, Reconsolidation is basically where you take what you have and you get it put back together. So, like if you're reconsolidating troops, let's say you gave first platoon company C to uh, company A first platoon, you would reconsolidate. Basically, you would bring those people back into company C.
Yeah,
And then there's reorganization. And reorganization is a little bit different. So, for example, let's say we had 50% losses in company B. Company B can't stand on their own anymore. What we would then do is take and recoup our losses in company A and company C through company B. And then once more people showed up, we would reinstitute a company B. And so during a truce, it allows you to do that on a large scale, but it also allows you to move people. So it allows you to take things and people and equipment and get them somewhere else without with a lot less risk.
Yeah.
Uh, your troop movements,
Harassment.
you can move much faster. You don't have to spread out so much. There's a lot of things that
Yeah.
that are beneficial to you to give somebody else the ability to have a truce.
Yeah, yeah. Tactically, and to be fair, it is also technically an advantage you are giving to the. And thank you, by the way, Ginger. Ginger posted the Veterans Crisis Hotline. You can call
Oh,
that
cool.
number. That's 1-800-273-8255. Again, if you're listening and you need that number, please feel free to do so. You just have to hit one to get to their veterans. But there is even if you're giving a tactical advantage to someone else, if you're able to gain a tactical advantage, that still might be a trade worth making. There's a lot of times where a zero sum kind of approach where I need to get a gain and they need to lose is not necessarily possible. And if it means you being able to maintain your forces for longer or better in a particular region, you actually really don't care too much if the other group is able to, especially if it's something you need. If you need it,
Yeah,
it's irrelevant. You need it.
you have to keep in mind that they have the home field advantage. This is their home.
Yeah.
We are. This is not our home. So for our forces, all of our support has to come from either the southern Vietnam,
Yeah.
or from allied nations,
Yeah.
or from home. So it's definitely beneficial. Definitely beneficial for us to allow them to have this time period of truce where, yes, they're going to be able to move their people around, but keep in mind that this is their holiday.
Yeah.
It's not our holiday. We don't celebrate Tet. We celebrate New Year's, and it's a totally different time. So for us, we can use that time very constructively.
Yeah. As well as the South Vietnamese too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that's good context. Yeah, there's and again, I want to be clear. Like Vietnam started in 1956, I believe, and went to 1975. This is a 19-year war, almost 20 years. This is a really long conflict. So these
Very protracted.
Yeah, the Tet kind of truce was something that was established over a long period of time. The Tet Offensive, which is what we're going to be talking about, actually didn't occur until 1968. So it is a pretty long time after the conflict has actually begun. Now, the nature by which the U.S. was in the conflict for that war is kind of different depending on which time frame you're talking about. But at this point, we had committed quite a lot of troops, and we had taken over. Originally, during Vietnam, there was a lot more emphasis on training South Vietnamese soldiers to fight the war almost exclusively at the very very beginning stages. And then there was a change in how U.S. forces were applied at the time as the conflict went on. So it's also kind of complicated. That Vietnam is almost like a different wars in the sense that they were fought very differently depending on the time period you're talking about.
Well, you have to understand that over the course of the length of the Vietnam War, the leadership changed.
Yeah.
There was, it started with one president, went to a different president, and then went to a completely different president.
Yeah.
So, there's lots of things that have taken, the leadership itself, its idea of what should be taking place changes with the leadership change.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. There's a lot of complexity going on here. We're not going to get too much into all of it just because of how complex it is. But specifically, when we're talking about the Tet Offensive, that is we're referring to the it was about 120 different engagements and attacks that happened by the North Vietnamese into U.S. And South Vietnamese controlled areas. And this took place again over a long period of time. It was over quite a few weeks. This was not just like one thing that happened immediately. But this was January end of January, I think after the 21st, is when the attacks really started happening, where the North Vietnamese realized that there's normally this is a truce period, which means we have the opportunity for a surprise attack. Now, problem with a surprise attack is you only get one. Once it's clear that once this is broken, once this truce is broken, there is no reason for the U.S. or South Vietnamese to ever again trust any kind of truce that's happening on this holiday. That is the kind of risk you take with this. This is a one-time gambit, which means at the time their idea is they have to put a lot of effort into this one move. It's kind of difficult to see what the idea was behind the individual decisions made by the leaders at this time. I think that the primary leader behind it was Vo Nguyen Gap. I'll just call him Gap for the sake of this, working in conjunction with Ho Chi Minh. But the idea behind this was that they would have this large offensive over a huge area, and they would do two things. They would make the U.S. Have difficulty committing troops, and that they would cause large-scale casualties, and hopefully sour the relationship between South Vietnam and the U.S. to where they would just say, you know what, this isn't worth engaging in. And the other thing that they hoped for is to actually inspire rebellion within the South Vietnamese groups and people towards the U.S. as well. So there's kind of two purposes of why they thought it would work. But to have an attack on this scale, this was for them what they thought was the perfect time to do so. So that's the kind of reasoning behind the offensive itself.
Well, it's desperation to some extent. They have not been winning a lot of the casualty rates were very lopsided.
Yeah, and they were here too. We'll get into that as well.
Yeah, they're very lopsided. So it's one of those things where at a certain point in chess or checkers or football, you throw a Hail Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And this is essentially a Hail Mary. This is, you know what? We have the opportunity, okay? And is it worth it to take this? I guarantee you that it had been considered prior to that.
Yeah.
So it requires a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's estimated that 80,000 troops were engaged from the North Vietnamese side for the Tet offensive. That's a lot. That you're committing a lot with 80,000.
And again, this is spread about 120 different areas of engagement. This is a large area.
Battle sites.
Yeah.
So individual cities and capitals and district capitals, and so
garrisons.
They had garrisons, embassies, lots of different, over 100 targets.
13 different cities were engaged.
And so now some of these were with large forces, and some of these were with smaller forces.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty of this is that you had years of truces to evaluate. And so keep this in, let's just put this in perspective. So let's say I have 5 years to see what you do for 7 days. And if for those 5 years you send 50% of your people home,
mm-hmm.
and then another 20% are not home but off on R&R,
mm-hmm.
it leaves only 30%, and that 30% isn't prepared for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're just doing kind of menial tasks, just the stuff that needs to happen. And so one of the biggest things that they were counting on was the lack of, and I'm going to read this real quick. And this is I'm going to say this is a statement from. Uh-oh, did I lose it? Give me 1 second. So, Vice President Nian K. Kai complained later after the Tet Offensive that a catastrophe loomed. In expectation of the usual Tet truce, half of our armed forces had gone on leave. To make things worse, most of our Army's combat forces were not deployed in or near big cities. General Westmoreland, who was in charge of the combat operations in Vietnam at that time, was particularly unhappy with the president, Thie, Thieu.
Yeah. I don't know how to pronounce it either, but
I don't know if it's Thie or Thie.
we'll say Thie.
Sorry. Who had been informed of security concerns in the northern region and had agreed to cancel the Tet ceasefire. So the president of South Vietnam had actually agreed to cancel the Tet ceasefire the day earlier. The day passed with no notice or cancellation. And according to Westmoreland, he telephoned the American embassy to find that the South Vietnamese government had provided its press officer with a press release, but that the press office had been shut tight. So something was issued, but there wasn't anybody to receive that because it was too these people are already on vacation, essentially. And that they were closed for Tet. So the people that were supposed to put it out were closed already for the holiday. So President Thai had departed to pass the holidays at his wife's hometown in the Mekong Delta. So he was celebrating Tet. And he stated that such a lackadaisical attitude on the part of the government was shockingly and frustrating, yet indicative of the state of mind near the euphoria that envelops the Vietnamese at Tet. Now, here's an individual who spent a lot of time in Vietnam, and he describes Tet as euphoric. It's a very unique word to use for a holiday. I mean, we wouldn't use that word for Christmas here. We would use bustle and hustle and grind, but never euphoric. So this is a very unique holiday for the Vietnamese people. It's and so there's a prep that happens even before Tet. But the reason I wanted to read that is because that is coming from not a U.S. source. But the vice president of South Vietnam. And so it's important to note that he states that over 50% of their forces were on vacation.
Now to be clear, the Tet Offensive was largely, as far as like tactically to gain ground or any of that thing of that nature, that it was a failure of. The North was beat back in just about every front that they fought on.
It was a failure in a lot of ways. So first and foremost, it wasn't coordinated. There was no way for them to coordinate. So they had to send runners to communicate. And let me see here just real quick. They had to send runners out to all of these different groups. Now, remember, there was over 100 targets. So that requires over 100 runners.
Mm-hmm.
In some instances, there was more than one group set to attack a target.
Mm-hmm.
And there were points where the small group attacked early,
Mm-hmm.
or the large group didn't get word and attacked late.
Yeah.
And so the smaller forces, while they had the element of surprise initially, keep in mind that these people have been fighting
Yeah.
for years. These are not like rookies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Again,
So
this
you could
is.
catch them by surprise and do some damage
Mhm.
initially, but the moment they get their feet underneath them, they're going to counterattack, and with better equipment and better tactics.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these people were wiped out very quickly because it was not very coordinated.
Yeah. This is 10 years
Um,
into the war, I believe, or 12 years into the war.
so
Um,
um, from the standpoint of, they threw a lot into it, but it was very ill organized.
yeah. For reference, the city of Hugh, which was one of
Mhm.
the largest sites of engagement,
Yeah.
there was 150 U.S. Marines that were killed. There was 400
Mhm.
South Vietnamese that were killed. There was 5,000 North Vietnamese that were killed in that engagement. That is the
Yes.
ratio of the conflict. Now, I should say the North Vietnamese also rounded up civilians at that time, and essentially killed anyone that had any connection to the U.S. Teachers, people who worked in the government, anything like that. That were South Vietnamese, and buried them in a mass grave. So that was probably, it seemed, arguably probably about 6,000 civilians died as well, from the North Vietnamese. But as far as the combatant engagement, um, they took extremely heavy losses for very little gain in the tactical department.
Now, I would like to say that one of the most important things that they benefited from was actually the press. And we had talked about this. So there's a photo of and I'm going to butcher the names here. I'm
Mm.
sorry if there's anybody out there that is family of these guys. I'm
Do your
terribly
best.
sorry.
You're good.
Nguyen Van Lem, a Viet Cong officer, summarily executed by Brigadier General Nguyen Ngoc Loan, the chief of the South Vietnamese National Police, on 1 February 1968. The photo was captured by Eddie Adams, AP reporter, and he won a Pulitzer Prize. And the photo is quite literally of a gentleman executing another gentleman.
Yeah.
And that picture uh, was I want to say the word is antithesis uh, for the U.S.
Hmm.
It was posted all over the place,
Yeah.
and it kind of became the rallying f- image
Hmm.
for people that were against the conflict
Yeah.
itself. I don't want to get into why they were against it, or why they were for it, or any of those things. It's
Yeah.
just that it was a catalyst. It was an actual image
Hmm.
of Southern Vietnamese police. Um, man, what
Real
was he?
quick, can you turn up your mic just a little bit, like a
Yes.
little tiny?
How about that? Is that good?
Lean back and talk.
How about that?
Turn it up just a little bit more. Because you keep leaning back, and I want to make sure when you're leaned back, I
Oh,
can.
how about that?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, perfect. Um, and so that was a result of that was during the Tet Offensive.
Hmm.
Okay, that was February 1st.
Yeah.
And so this took place, and so that image, while this gentleman won a Pulitzer for it, um, was very detrimental to the war effort.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, this was the Tet Offensive is essentially used as a dividing line, in history, for what is a clear mark of a definite decline, in public opinion, specifically on the Vietnam War. This was a very difficult to explain, to the point where there was senators who were prepared to vote, to send more troops, 200,000 more troops. But after this event happened, there was a lot of politicians that moved back actually on their commitments to vote to send troops and to vote to support. Now there was still support. Obviously, again, the war ended in 1975, so there was still years of conflict to come. Not only that, but um, for reference, more people died, more U.S. soldiers died during the peace talks that happened after this than in any other year prior to that. From 1956 to 1967, 20,000 U.S. soldiers died. From 1968 to 1975, 38,000 U.S. soldiers died. So it was this weird thing of both a loss of U.S. support from the public as well as a ramp up of U.S. casualties over the course of the conflict after that point. Um,
So I got one more thing that I want to pull out of this because I think
go
it's
for it.
absolutely unique and kind of profound.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so Walter Cronkite, pretty famous
Yeah.
as a news anchor. Okay, people trusted this person.
Mm-hmm.
He was in their homes, right? Um, so with the Tet offense being called over, um, and it lasted until 18 April,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Um, and we claimed victory. And, you know, it's saying here, lasted 26 days. Walter Cronkite from the CBS Evening News, he had questions.
Mm-hmm.
And when the initial reports of the widespread attack started pouring in, his first reaction was to wave them at his producers. What the hell is going on? I thought we were winning the war. The next evening, the 2nd of February, Cronkite spoke to an audience of millions. The Allies proclaimed today that they have broken the back of the 5-day-old communist offensive in South Vietnam. But dispatches out of the pathetic country tell a somewhat different story. So these are his words. Cronkite was bothered by the disparity between the official accounts um, and what was coming out of Vietnam. So on February 11th, he decided to see it for himself. So Walter Cronkite was a war correspondent in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And he was confident in his ability to accurately assess the reality of the operational situation. And so before he could even set foot, Cronkite was suspicious, and his suspicions were confirmed. His flight into Vietnam had trouble finding a place to land because one of the main targets of the Tet Offensive was airfields.
Mm-hmm.
He was also forbidden from traveling to Quezon due to the dangers associated with traveling there. During his interview with General Westmoreland, he was assured that the Tet was a big success and that the battle for Hue was done with Allied forces defeating over 10,000 enemy troops there. The general had earlier asserted that there was no more than a few hundred enemy in Hue. So now I want to go to what he actually says once he comes back. And so this is his this is an infamous report that he was delivering on the 27th of February.
Mm-hmm.
We have been too often disappointed by the optimism of the American leaders, both in Vietnam and Washington, to have faith any longer in their silver linings they find in the darkest clouds. To say we are closer to victory today is to believe in the face of the evidence. The optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest that we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable optimism. To say that we are mired in a stalemate seems the only realistic, yet unsatisfactory conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
On the off chance that military and political analysts are right, in the next few months, we must test the enemy's intentions. In case this is indeed his last big gasp before negotiations. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as visitors or not as victors, sorry, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. So that was his news release. And keep in mind that the president at the time made a statement. And if it was, and he basically said, if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the country.
Yeah.
Because this gentleman's words had that much effect on the population. So you had two things that came kind of out of this that had drastic importance on what would happen later. The picture that became a Pulitzer Prize winning picture, and a news anchor that essentially was saying we need to negotiate.
Yeah. There's a it's hard because like it's very difficult to say how much of the effect of the Tet Offensive was just going to happen with a prolonged conflict that the U.S. population as a whole had no interest in engaging in. To be honest, there was, like, other than the rah against communism, there was no other public support reason to engage in that war. It's hard to say what would happen without this going, or without those pictures, but yeah, it's definitely clear that this is an easy to identify catalyst to be able to point to and say, yes, it is hard for it was hard for journalists to justify the war before that, but it's even harder after experiencing these kind of losses for a gain of what can be explained to the public is very little, as a gain of a win against communism, a concept that the public doesn't even understand and that doesn't affect them in the end. Again, added with the fact that we're talking about a war that took place over multiple administrations and multiple had multiple belligerents and multiple reasons for why Russia and U.S. and other allies engaged in it. But it is a pretty, I think it is a pretty important note that journalists alone can take such a different and heavy look towards it. But that does bring us to the hour and I think like 20-minute mark. So okay. I think I want to start wrapping this up. Okay. Any other last thoughts on the Tet Offensive?
Well, I would just say that.
Wait, sorry.
The Tet Offensive.
Wait, hold on, real quick. You're kind of cutting out. If you're gonna be back, your mic is good. But if you want to move in, you're gonna have to turn your mic down a little bit.
Sorry.
You're good.
No, I'll stay back. Sorry.
You're good.
So I will say that the Tet, the Tet Offensive of Vietnam drastically changed warfare from that point on.
Yeah.
There are no longer truces. There are inactive periods of time. The thought of a truce is very skeptical. From that point on, it does not occur. There are points where fighting doesn't happen. However, everybody is prepared to fight the entire time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it changed history.
Yeah.
And it did change the future and how truces were looked at from that point on. And they weren't the first to attack during a truce. But on the whole, they're pretty much the last to attack during a truce, because people don't do it anymore, because it doesn't have the same the honor of it has been taken away. And that's important. From a military standpoint.
The risk,
a huge vulnerability.
Once you're aware of the risk fully, it's not a risk worth taking, especially for an organized military that already has a pretty structured system around resupplying, restructuring, reallocating, that isn't built independent on any kind of truce or inactivity,
Exactly.
like based on the thing. That's kind of what has been planned around. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. I would agree. It seems like the concept definitely isn't really beneficial to engage in anymore. For a standing military or for a nation state, I can't speak to like interstate conflicts if there's any still
That's
thing there, but
that's a
that's
little
different
different.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good note to end that on.
Yeah.
We are, I think we're at an hour and 20. Do we want to call it or do we want to? I don't.
Now let's just talk a little bit
Okay, well, that's what I was gonna say. So
on the other stuff.
we had something we want to talk about, which is specifically your experience with holidays and deployment and things like that. In the modern battle.
So, for the most part, a holiday is recognized,
Mm-hmm.
but we do not shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of times, what would take place is um, we may have a small celebration at mealtime. So, you show up for dinner. You were gonna go to dinner, and you're not doing your job, and you're not fighting at dinner.
Yeah.
You're resupplying your body.
Yeah.
So we aren't losing any time
Mm-hmm.
by doing that.
The thing you were gonna have to
Um,
do anyways. Yeah.
exactly. A lot of times, the leadership will take over some of the roles of the junior folks and
Mm-hmm.
give them some time off. Now, something unique happens at important holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the things that is unique that happens during holidays is something called depression. It's very profound,
Yeah.
um, especially when you are in extreme conditions
Mm-hmm.
and you are away from the things that you value.
Mm-hmm.
All right, your family, your friends, uh, your pets, your home, your cars. You're away from all those things that you value.
Yeah.
It is depressing for. Well, we'll just talk about Christmas itself.
Mm-hmm.
The highest rates of depression in the United States occurred during the Christmas
Yeah.
season. And that's just in the United States. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the civilians. Now imagine that from people that don't have access to their families.
Yeah.
So we get, as leaders, we are very careful around holidays
Mm-hmm.
and how we treat people.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to lighten up a little bit
Mm-hmm.
on them. We don't try to give them more than they can handle in that time period because it's already a very stressful, difficult time.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I would do is I would take guard shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would take and try to give as many people time off as I could.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be careful to temper that as well because we're talking about depression.
Yeah.
And so you have to know each individual and what they need. Some
Yeah.
people need to be working
Mm-hmm.
during that time period. So they're not dwelling on the
Thinking
fact that
about
they're
it.
not at home.
Mm-hmm.
They're not dwelling on the fact that they're missing their kid's first Christmas.
Yeah.
Okay, these are things that are reality for all those individuals. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to take a unique approach to each individual and give them what they need during that time period
Mm-hmm.
to get through it. But work still has to be done. I
Yeah.
talked about guard shifts. Food needs to be cooked. Guards need to be on shift.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to be doing those roles.
Yeah.
So not everyone is going to get time off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of times, keep in mind that Christmas is just a day. I can give a guy time off on the 23rd, say, hey, Merry Christmas. I can give a guy time off on the 27th and
Yeah.
say, Merry Christmas. And I can explain that, hey, so it is a very unique thing, but we do not shut down for
Yeah.
Christmas. We don't. Uh, A lot of the people that you might be engaged in combat with have holidays as well.
Yeah.
We do not shut down for their holidays. Now, we may not engage in operations during their holidays. That is not a truce.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you said. It's an inactivity period, not a truce.
Correct.
Yeah.
We're choosing to not engage in operations during that time period, but it is for our benefit and our benefit alone. It's not for their benefit.
Yeah.
And so we use that time to do a lot of different things. And it's important to note that it's not just difficult for those individuals in the combat zone. You see, all of those individuals have someone, at least one, that cares about them. They are also having the same holiday with the same loss.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, I've always said this. In some aspects, it's easier being deployed on the member that has been deployed. And the reason I say that is because my meals are taken care of, my laundry is taken care of. I don't have to take care of a vehicle. I mean, I take care of the military vehicles and the equipment and all those things, but I don't have to fix the washing machine. I don't have to fix the dryer. I don't have to mow the lawn. I don't have to take the kids to school. I don't have to pick them up. So in some aspects, my life gets dummied down and compartmentalized into just warfare.
Yeah.
Whereas I have the stress of warfare, but I don't have those outside things necessarily going on. Whereas the families that are home, they're struggling with that individual that normally changes the oil and normally cuts the grass isn't able to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And they have to figure out a way to do that. And that can be very stressful and very difficult. But one of the unique things that the U.S. military has, and I can't speak about all militaries throughout the world, but during the holidays, at this point, there is usually an outpouring of people that are willing to send things to be helpful. Care packages, letters from classes,
blankets,
from kids, blankets and wet wipes and jerky.
Jerky.
And so I just want to use this time, to say, hey, we have kind of been in a state of conflict for over 30 years. Honestly,
we've essentially had some kind of conflict running.
We're continually all over the world. So when it comes time for a holiday, it doesn't matter what the holiday is, Valentine's Day, whatever. Go to a local veterans organization, see if they're doing any care packages for troops, and just even if you can't necessarily afford to put anything in the package, maybe you can help build the packages or help mail the packages or help assemble the packages. Write letters, pictures, you name it. All of those things are always greatly appreciated by those individuals. And then the last thing I would say is during the holidays, it's easy to get focused on those the men and women that are overseas and are doing that type of work. Don't forget about the families that are here and that are struggling and that are missing that part of that household. Don't forget about them, and if there's a way to help them out, do so. They will absolutely appreciate it. And believe it or not, the individuals that are overseas, when their families are taken care of, it's easier for them to do their job. It's easier for them to engage the enemy and do what they need to be doing, because they aren't worried about what's happening across an ocean.
No, I think that's well said. I agree. I think it made quite a bit of difference. But I think that's a great note to end on. Before we do, any last thoughts before we close out?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do people subscribe to the podcast, and do they get notified when there's
Yes.
a new release?
Yeah. So if you are on, if you're listening to this after the fact, you can subscribe to us on the podcast service of your liking. You should be able to search for us anywhere. I think the only thing we're not on currently is Pandora because they won't. They're backed up for some reason, and I keep emailing them, and they don't. They haven't done it yet, but eventually we'll be there. But whatever podcast service you have, you can give us a follow. You'll get a notification anytime we post a new episode. This one will hopefully be out within the next couple of days. We also are on YouTube. You can subscribe to us there. I post them all there. And if you're watching us Twitch, or if you ever want to watch us live on Twitch, you can actually go to our Twitch account, twitch.tv/War Room Podcast. You can subscribe to us, or you can follow us there. That way you'll get a notification anytime we go live. You can also subscribe using your Amazon Prime account, which, well, actually, I guess you can't do that now. You can subscribe, but that does cost money. That just helps support us. Just give us a follow if you want to be notified that we're going live. So any of those ways, you can get a notification that we are going to be coming back on again. As we work through these and as we do more, hopefully we'll set up some kind of cadence to have these delivered at a set time or particular time. But right now it is just a fun hobby to do. So, they get out when they get out. And to be honest, there's a fair amount of research that goes into each of them. So it's not a small task either. But yes, people can subscribe through those methods.
And I want to thank everybody that does view this, and hopefully you enjoy them, and then you'll come back and listen.
Yeah, no, thank you everyone listening. We really appreciate your time. Really appreciate your view. Anything else?
If we made any mistakes or if we made any errors, feel free to contact Kyle.
Yeah, yeah,
he'll handle all the editing and all the revisions.
yeah.
But yeah, any mistakes that we may have made, were definitely not on purpose. We didn't try to slide anybody.
Yes. Yeah. The warchat@gmail.com. If you want to write us, if you have any recommendations for the episodes, if you like them, if you noticed anything wrong, if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to comment below any of the corrections you might have, any of the comments you might have. Do be respectful. That is my only request. I will remove any comments and yell at anyone that is just inherently disrespectful to either us or any of the soldiers involved in any of the conflicts we discuss. But there's multiple ways to reach out to us if you have any corrections for us or any thoughts on the podcast.
Everybody, please take care of yourselves. Wear your masks. Use sanitizer.
Yeah.
COVID is real, and it is affecting a lot of people. So take care of yourselves. Take care of your families, please.
Yeah, please do. And with that, we're going to go ahead and end. That is the end of the War Room podcast. We appreciate everyone that listened. Please do give us a follow. Please do give us a comment anywhere where you are watching this. Be on the lookout for our next episode. We're not sure what that's going to be, but I assume it'll be an enthralling one once it is out. So we appreciate you. Again, you can catch us live on twitch.tv/the War Room Podcast. War Room Podcast. Just know and we're happy to have you. And with that, thank you so much for your time. Everyone have a good night.